All right, y'all. Today we are going to kind of extend our knowledge of solving radical equations. We're going to go one step further, and then we'll dig in even more next class. Okay, so go ahead and write down your notes title, 3.4a, Notes Solving Radical Equations, and start with this warm-up. So I want you to write this whole thing down. Solve square root of x plus 3 plus 6 equals 0. All right, and then what is the first step to solving this radical equation? We need to solve for x. First step. All right, the first step is to subtract 6 on both sides. We need to isolate the square root. Isolate the square root by subtracting 6 on both sides, and we are left with square root of x plus 3 equals negative 6. All right, our second step normally would be to square both sides. But here's the thing, y'all. We are going to have to start being a little bit smarter and a little bit more careful when we're working with these problems, because I have to show you, or talk to you about this situation. We do not want to square both sides in this situation. Why? Why do we not want to square both sides? Because we have a square root function here. There's a radical function here, a square root. And then we have that square root equal to a negative. Can a square root of any number ever equal a negative? I want you to think about that. Can you square root something, some number in this box, and get a negative number out of a square root? Let's think about it. 0 times 0. Square root means like there's two things in here. There's two things multiplying to make the number inside, right? So 0 times 0, that gives me 0. What about 1 times 1? That gives me 1. 2 times 2, that gives me 4. What if I try negative numbers? Negative 2 times negative 2. But negative times a negative turns positive. So no matter what, the square root has to have a positive number in here, and it has to actually make a positive number out here. So you cannot get a negative out of a square root. You can't get a negative out of a square root function. So here we go. Instead of squaring both sides, when you get a square root equal to a negative, you are just going to be able to stop right there and say, time out. I don't need to do any more work. I know that there is no solution. There's no solution to this problem. And then let's make sure we write down the note. A square root can't equal a negative. Can't equal a negative. A negative number. Okay, so you need to make sure you know that. I want you to do this one. Do this one. Square root of x minus 2 plus 9 equals 0. Does this radical equation have a real solution? Does it have a real solution? Why or why not? All right, let's move on to solving square roots that we actually can solve. Oh, and by the way, there is no real solution to this radical because we subtract 9 on both sides. We subtract 9 minus 9. Those cancel out. And then we end up with x minus 2 under my square root. Square root of x minus 2 equals negative 9. Well, we have the same situation, a square root equaling a negative number. That is not allowed, so no solution. No real solution here. Okay, let's go on to our example for the day. Make sure you get this entire example down. Solve for x. Check for extraneous solutions. Okay, and our steps are actually the same steps as last class. So I'm just going to very quickly write those steps down. The first step was isolate the square root and the stuff that's under it. So first step, isolate this thing. We want to isolate that whole thing. I want you to tell me what is required to isolate this thing. What should I do? What should I do first? All right, we are going to add 5 on both sides. So plus 5 plus 5. All right, the 5's cancel out on this side. And then we get x plus 7 under my square root equals x plus 5. Sweet. Okay, cool. And actually, sorry, I'll do that. I wanted to do that in this color. X plus 7 square root equals x plus 5. Sweet. Okay, second step. Second step was square both sides. And remember the difference between square is a little 2 up in the air, and square root. Square both sides. So what are we going to do? We are going to square both sides. I'm going to square this side, and I know that when I square that side, that square root's going to disappear. So I kind of cross it out right there to remind myself that's going away. And then here's a catch, y'all. We have to be very careful. This is a quantity. We have multiple pieces here on the right-hand side. So you are not allowed to square the pieces separately. You have to square the entire side. We have to square this entire right-hand side. So what are we going to do? We're going to put it in parentheses, the whole side, the whole right-hand side, and we're going to square it like that. Okay, so let me write down what we have after. So we have x plus 7 equals, okay, and then we need to use the trick that we reviewed in the do now. The trick that we reviewed in the do now to do this x plus 5 squared. So x plus 7 equals. I'm going to go over the trick. So we have x squared. Anytime you have a quantity squared, you can use this trick. So it's the first term squared, so we have x squared. Then in the middle, we do 2 times both terms. So 2 times x times 5. So we have plus 2 times 5, which is 10, times x. So plus 10x. And actually, you know what? I'll write it out for y'all. So 2 times 5 times x. You just always do 2 times both pieces. Okay. And then the last thing we put is the last term squared. So plus 5 squared, which is 25. Actually, I'll leave it like this and we'll simplify. Okay, so that's the trick. First term squared plus 2 times both of the terms, plus last term squared. Okay, let's simplify that. So we have x plus 7 equals x squared plus 10x, because 2 times 5 is 10, plus 25. Sweet. Now, what should we do to solve? I'm going to give you a hint. What do we notice we have here? X squared. Now, how do we solve equations with x squared? What do we call an equation with x squared? And how do we solve those equations? What's the first step to solve an equation that has x squared? All right, y'all. We have x squared. So that means we have a quadratic. That's what the name of that equation is. So if you see x squared, we have a quadratic equation. Quadratic if x squared. So please write down that in part of step 3. We have a quadratic if we see x squared. So how do we solve? We get one side equal to 0. Get one side equal to 0, and then factor. That's how you solve quadratics. Anytime you see x squared, you need to think about, oh, I need to get one side equal to 0, and then I need a factor. So what are we going to do? We are going to get this side equal to 0 by using inverse operations. So let's do minus x minus 7 minus x minus 7 on both sides. And these will cancel out on the left-hand side. So we get 0 equals x squared plus 10x. Oops, sorry. It's 10x minus x. So plus 9x. And then it's 25 minus 7. So plus 18. All right. We got one side equal to 0. And then the next part of our step says now we need a factor. So we have 0 equals Let's go ahead and draw our factors in. And remember, we're going to try to not use the box because our a value, this number out in front, is 1. So we know our factors start with x. And we need numbers that multiply. We need numbers that multiply to 18 and add to 9. Multiply to 18, add to 9, 6, positive 6, and positive 3. Those multiply to 18 and add to 9, right? Sweet. Those are our factors. So now we need to write our solutions, write our zeros. Oops, so I forgot to put that. We need to factor and then write solutions. Here, let me cross out this number 4. Write solutions. Okay, so x equals, flip the sign, negative 6, and x equals, flip the sign, negative 3. Sweet. We are not done yet, though, because this is a radical, and radicals have x values that are not allowed or restricted x values. So what do we need to do last? Same as before. We need to check for extraneous solutions. Check for extraneous solutions. So how do we do that? Plug x back in. Now we have two x's here. We have negative 6 and negative 3. We are going to have to plug both of them back in. A lot of students are annoyed by this part of the problem. I am sorry if you're annoyed. Don't be lazy. It's not that bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down what we started with, this x plus 7 minus 5 equals x, or sorry, square root of x plus 7 minus 5 equals x. I'm going to write it down 2 times because we're going to check 2 x values. So actually I'll write it down once and then we'll check. So check x equals negative 6. So x equals negative 6. We are going to now plug in negative 6 where we see an x. So we have negative 6 plus 7 under the square root. Then we have minus 5 equals, and then this is an x as well, so we have to put negative 6 wherever we see x. And now remember, leave this side alone and simplify the left-hand side. So let's go ahead and do that. Negative 6 plus 7 inside my square root, that simplifies to 1. So square root of 1 minus 5 equals negative 6. 1 minus 5, or sorry, square root of 1 is 1, so we have 1 minus 5 equals negative 6. 1 minus 5 is negative 4. Aha! Okay, so does negative 4 equal negative 6? No. This is not true. No, that's not right. So what do? We come up here to where x was equal to negative 6. That's what we just tested, right? This did not work. So we come up to that solution and we cross it out and we write extraneous. This is an example of an extraneous solution. It's an x value that's actually restricted. It's not allowed. It does not work. Okay, now let's go ahead and test x equals negative 3. So here we go. Let's test x equals negative 3. We're going to start with our initial equation and plug in negative 3 for the x values. So I'm going to do it in blue for you. There we go. We have x is negative 3 here and negative 3 here. Cool. So now let's simplify. Negative 3 plus 7, that's 4. So we have square root of 4 minus 5 equals negative 3. Square root of 4 is 2, so we have 2 minus 5. Oops, 2 minus 5 equals negative 3. All right, and then we get negative 3 equals negative 3. Is that true? Yes. Yes, that's true. So we can box our answer, x equals negative 3, and that is our real solution. This is our solution to the problem. The other one, negative 6, that is not a solution. That's fake. Okay, that is notes for today. Let's get some practice in.